God is all of life. Church is not something that we just do on Sundays and, for the really righteous ones, Sundays and Wednesdays. That being a child of God is an every moment kind of thing. Now, this is Memorial Day, as you see the graphic on the screen, or tomorrow is Memorial Day. And Memorial Day is one of those holidays that I think has great interaction and interweaving with the Christian life. Memorial Day was made official back in 1971, which for most of us just sounds like yesterday, but for some of us sounds like that was way before I was born. We don't like you. But the idea of Memorial Day has its roots as far back as the end of the Civil War. It was originally known as Decoration Day, and its first observance was May 30th, 1868. And they chose that date because that specific date, May 30th, was not tied to any particular battle. So it was more of a global recognition. And at that time, they took the time to decorate the graves of the fallen. And with World War I and World War II, the day expanded to decorate the graves of these soldiers as well. So while Veterans Day honors all who have served, Memorial Day calls us to remember and honor those that made the ultimate sacrifice. It strikes me that in this particular holiday, Memorial Day, I remember the interaction of Jesus with the centurion. One of the greatest compliments Jesus ever gives is to a Roman soldier. I believe Jesus had a deep appreciation, even an admiration for soldiers. So there was someone sick in this soldier's household, and he comes to Jesus to ask him to come to his home to heal. And on the way, he receives a message, why trouble the teacher anymore? The person you wanted him to heal is dead. This soldier in his conversation with Jesus says, you don't even have to come to my house. I'm someone who is a man of authority, and if I tell someone under me to do something, they do it. And this idea of trusting that it will be done, this idea of obedience, this idea of being trained to execute the orders of another really gets the attention of Jesus in these verses. You know what? I'm mixing up two stories. I'm sorry. So the centurion goes to Jesus and asks him to come and heal a servant who he thinks a lot about. And actually, I'm sorry, I'm not thinking of two stories. I need a nap, and then I'll come back, and everything will be good. It's in Luke chapter 7, if you really want to know how this goes, and you'll enjoy it a whole lot more. So not far from the house, and the centurion sends friends to say to him, Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. That's why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. So he hadn't even come to Jesus. He just sent people to ask Jesus to come. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed, for I myself am a man under authority. Always smarter just to read the text. I myself am a man under authority. I have people that I have to check in with. I have people that I submit to. And I have soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, he goes. I tell that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and it's done. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. You hear that? Jesus was amazed at this soldier. And turning to the crowd that was following him, he said, I tell you, I have not found such faith even in Israel. Even among my own people. At this level of understanding of authority, this level of understanding of executing orders, there's something amazing about that. And a lot of it has to do with what we're talking about this year, trust. This Memorial Day, we honor, we remember those who trusted their commanding officers enough to go into harm's way and pay the ultimate price so that we could be here on a Sunday morning and not have to worry about the police barging in or mistreatment or anything. I was talking with Robert and Rebecca yesterday over at dinner at Dan's, and as we were talking about Memorial Day a little bit, Robert recalled Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. We were talking about how Memorial Day ties into the Christian life. He said there's a sentence that Lincoln shared in the Gettysburg Address that really ties into our life as followers of God. As Lincoln, in this very short speech, talks about being engaged in a great civil war and that they've come to this particular place to dedicate a portion of this field as a final resting place. He says, in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or to detract. What Jesus did in coming to this earth and laying down his life, entering the battle and paying the price, ties directly into that idea of Memorial Day. We just took of his body and his blood because it is he who consecrates this ground. It is he who consecrates this life. It is he who redeemed us and set us free. And so we take those tie-ins to Memorial Day to heart today, and I pray that you'll celebrate by remembering the sacrifices made tomorrow. But in the meantime, we're going to watch a short little video that hopefully will help us to remember, to honor those that have given so much for our freedom.
How do we say thank you to those who gave everything? How do we honor the men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom? We say thank you by remembering. Today, we honor our heroes, lives given not in vain, but with purpose. We stand grateful for their courage, their strength, and their resolve. For the fabric of America is stitched together by the thread of the brave. Today, we remember, and we will never forget.
There's a comment made about Memorial Day that has no no person attributed to it, but it is a powerful thought and a powerful statement. That the flag does not blow in the breeze. The flag is not blown by the breeze, but it is blown by the last breath of the soldiers who gave themselves for it. Let's make sure to take time tomorrow and be thankful. Now, strange as it might seem, the book of Ruth actually ties into what we're talking about. The book of Ruth is 4 short chapters, but it is our resting place for the next 4 weeks. Now, I say the next 4 weeks. Next week is actually Senior Sunday, so we'll do something a little different then, but today and then the 3 weeks following that. And we're going to take a look at how this idea of trust weaves its way through the beautiful narrative of Ruth. But I have something for you. I need a couple of people that really love Jesus to help me out here and pass out these handouts. Anyone love Jesus? Oh, our guests love Jesus the most. Oh, now it's quite obvious because this is Todd, Twyla's little brother, who is cute and wonderful, and everybody loves Todd. And then his wife, Darla, who prayed him to her. So she can't complain, because that would be saying God didn't do the right thing. Thank you very much for helping us out. So in the seat back 6 feet in front of you, there are pens, and I'm going to ask you to fill these out. And you may, if you have a good memory, you may remember these handouts from way back in 2015 was the last time we talked about Ruth in any depth. So that was 8 years ago. And we're just going to go through, and today what we're going to do is kind of the overview of Ruth. So this is the Bible class version of our 4-part series here, which is part 7 of our Trust Enough to Change series. So part 7 will have part 7A, 7B, 7C, and 7D. This is 7A. All right, everybody get one? Anybody need one? All right. Thank you all again very much. The story of Ruth, the book of Ruth, uses the narrative literary style to make its point. And it takes the whole book to make its point. It is a beautiful and powerful short story. There is strong evidence of the book's intent throughout the book, and yet, as I said, the entire book is needed to make its point. From a human perspective, the book of Ruth deals with ordinary people and mundane, I'm not mundane as in boring, but mundane as in typical life affairs. It takes place during the time of Judges. So this is one of the older books. And there is a crisis. As in any good story, there is a crisis that needs to be resolved, that needs to be dealt with. And the crisis in this case is the Israelite custom of carrying on the family name. We'll get to that as we go through the story. Some say that the book of Ruth is a commentary, at least in part, on the Levitical law, as you read it in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 1, where the Lord says to Moses, "When an alien lives in your land, lives with you in your land, do not mistreat them. The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were once aliens in Egypt. I am the Lord your God." Now, you might hear that and go, yeah, but they weren't treated very good in Egypt. Exactly. And so what God is doing is training his people to do better and to live life the way that he lives life. He makes no judgments. by blood. For us, it would be by skin color or any other separating factor. His love is open and available to all who would seek him, to all who come to him. It is a free gift, one that we cannot earn. And when what Scott said so nicely in class, we can't earn it. Tim Keller, who recently passed, uses this metaphor. And he's actually quoting someone else, and I forgot who it is he's quoting. He says, we have no more ability to earn God's grace than a spider web has a chance of stopping a rock, a large rock. That all the good we do, and we build our spider web of good, is no match for a rock. And it takes the goodness of God to stop that rock, to stop sin, to stop our unholiness. And God is telling his people in this little book, in Leviticus chapter 19, that when an alien lives among you, you treat them as you would like to be treated, as I have treated you. You do better than the world. Well, Ruth is a 4-act story. Let's run through it very quickly. Ruth is full of this idea that I call God talk. God is mentioned all over the place, everywhere. He is in the middle of every situation of every moment. It's all about God's life on this earth. Everything is attributed to God. Everything is blamed on God. Everything is praised because of God. It is about the beautiful and wonderful kingdom of God being alive on this earth in God's people. It is about the beautiful gift of redemption that God extends to each and every one of us. So in the prologue, Ruth 1 through 15, the crisis is introduced. There's a family that leaves their homeland, their Jewish homeland, and goes to Moab, a foreign place that has actually been in multiple skirmishes with Israel. They go there to live, and their 2 sons, Naomi and her husband's 2 sons, find Moab wives. So they intermarry, which is generally not looked highly upon. And we'll dig into that a little bit in the coming weeks. These 2 sons and Naomi, the mother, the matriarch of this story, Naomi's husband, all pass away. So all the men pass away. So Naomi, an Israelite, is left in a foreign land with 2 foreign daughters-in-law. She has no legal standing in this other country. And so she has to turn home. Now, at the same time, the introduction of the crisis is that the family name has just lost any chance of being extended. Now, in 21st century America, we might say, well, isn't the big crisis that she lost her husband and her sons? I'm not trying to minimize that. But you have to put on the sandals of 3,000 years ago and live life, understand life from their point of view to understand the crisis that God addresses. And for them, the idea of carrying on the family name was incredibly important. Of course, losing a husband, losing 2 children rips your soul in two. But the idea that the family name would die with them is the crushing blow. Naomi renames herself bitterness. And she is ready to go back home to depend on the mercy of her family, her nation, her community. cousins perhaps, just to survive life. And so she releases her daughters-in-law to go back to their home, to the safety of their home, to the provisions of their home, for she has nothing to offer them. I'm sorry, the crisis is introduced in verses 1 through 5, I believe. I think I said 15. Yeah, 1 through 5, I'm sorry. By the way, you're reading Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 34. I want you to hear echoes of that reading throughout this scripture. Don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Is life not more than food, and body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? The book of Ruth is a living example of how valuable you are and how God steps in to take care of us. So Act 1 begins in verse 6 of chapter 1. And there's this incredibly beautiful and wonderful statement that Naomi says to her two daughters-in-law. I say it's beautiful and wonderful. It's telling, it's revealing. Go back, each of you, to your mother's home, and may the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. That's called a parallel statement. Naomi exposes the Jewish idea, and when I say the Jewish idea, I really mean the God idea of reflective living. May Yahweh show chesed to you, kindness to you. Remember that Hebrew word chesed is that word that is just absolutely undefinable. It is the central core characteristic of the nature of God. It is who God is at the very depths of his soul. He is kind. He is loyal. His love is steadfast, which is how you see it translated so often. Steadfast love. Sometimes it's even translated as mercy, as loyalty, as all these other words, because it's just too big a word to find a home in one English word or thought or concept. God's heart is too big to be contained by one word. And so the Hebrew language gives us this concept word, chesed. There are Jews, rabbis, that spend their entire lives trying to learn what that truly is all about. God's core characteristic of chesed, and it runs rampant in this book, in this little book. And in the midst of this sorrow, in the midst of this crisis, in the midst of this pain, Naomi falls back on what she knows the most. May Yahweh show kindness to you as you have shown to your husbands, to my husband, to me. She is seeking God's favor upon them, God's blessing upon them, because she recognizes how they have blessed her. What a healthy thing for us to do with each other. I'm getting into too much detail, and I need to start running. But we're in verse 8 of chapter 1, so we should be out of here by about 6. Okay. In verse 13, in Naomi's pain, she cries out because the daughters don't want to leave, and so they're having this little back and forth. Return home, my daughters. I'm in verse 12. I'm too old to have another husband, and even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a child, would you wait until they grew up in order to carry on the name? You see how that plays a central role in this text. No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Now, some might think that that's heresy, that she has blamed God for the death of her husband and the death of her sons and the fact that the family name has died on her watch. The Lord's hand has turned against me. But I don't think it's heresy. I think God here is doing what he does throughout the Psalms and just telling us to be honest with him about our struggles, about our feelings, about our wrestling with life. You see, for her, God is in the midst of this tragedy. Sometimes we try to explain it away by saying, well, God allowed it to happen, but he didn't cause it to happen. I don't know that I'm smart enough to say that. I mean, I've read the book of Job, and it's pretty nasty. Does God sometimes bring tragedy upon us? There's an Irish preacher in our brotherhood, Jim McGuigan. His wife is in excruciating pain all the time. And he says that they've spent every penny they have on doctors and trying to figure out what's going on and all that. And he says that he used to at first blame God and was angry at God. And then he got past that, and then he decided that it was Satan was doing that to him. And then he decided it's just life. It just has to happen, so why not to them? But he couldn't stand the way that he couldn't stand seeing his wife suffer as much as she did, and it would just continue to tear. And so this is a process that went over decades. And he finally came to a place, he said, when he started really studying the Psalms. And he says, as much as I hate to admit it, now I think God did this to her. And when I've told some people that, they've responded, do you think we have a cruel God, a God that cruel that would do that? And I say, that's not what I think. I think that he did this because if he did this, that means there is a purpose to it and that he's in the middle of it. And if he's in the middle of it with us, then we can walk through it with him. So I don't think what Naomi says is in any way heresy or in any way even slightly bad. I think it's a beautiful acknowledgement that God is in the midst even of this moment. The three ladies weep aloud together. Orpah kisses her mother-in-law and says goodbye, but Ruth clings to her. And again, we'll dig into this a little bit more. The conversation goes back and forth between Naomi and Ruth, and Ruth refuses to go. And she says in verse 16, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may Yahweh deal with me ever so severely if even death separates you and me. I think that's on your sheet, right? Yeah. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Your people and your God are now mine. I am completely adopting you, is what she's saying. Even knowing that she is trading a safe life, a life with a full belly, a life of being taken care of by her family. She's trading that in for a life that knows not where the next meal is coming from. Why would she do that? Why would she adopt herself to Naomi? It's one of the things we're going to explore. What was it about Naomi's life that was so beautiful and so precious and so valuable that she was willing to give up the safety of going back home to adopt this unknown home? I think the answer is maybe it wasn't quite so unknown, because she had lived with Naomi and seen the beauty of Naomi's trust in an ever-present God. We'll explore that more later. But this is a new, amazing covenant when she claims Naomi's people, Naomi's God, as her own. All right, moving into chapter 2. Naomi has relatives. They've gone back home, and Naomi has relatives, and so she goes and sends Ruth to glean in a man named Boaz's field. Boaz is from the clan of Elimelech, and we'll get into that. There is some significance there, and we'll get into that in the coming weeks. She goes and she picks up grain, the leftover grain, which is gleaning. Ooh, I've got to hurry. Leviticus 19, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time and pick up those grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and for the alien. I am Yahweh your God. Not all Hebrews did this. Boaz did. Boaz was a good man. Boaz was a godly man, one whose character and lifestyle was godlike. And one of the things that we'll discuss when we talk about Boaz is that's our goal as well, to become that kind of man. Okay, we're going to really have to hurry. So Boaz is impressed with Ruth, and we can't get into the specifics here, but he has been told what she did for her mother-in-law, how she's following her, how she's supporting her, how she's now working for her. And Boaz gives one of these parallel statements to her in chapter 2, verse 12. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. I wonder if David, when he penned Psalm 63 and talked about hiding under the shadow of his wings, was thinking of Boaz's words to his great-grandmother. Or his great-grandmother. I forget which one, how many levels are there. We'll talk more about that. But again, that idea of God talk, that idea that God is in the midst of everything, that idea that being so close to God that you can ask God to repay the great kindness that's been shown to you by another, that God would repay them for that. That you're opening the door to God's blessings by your very words, by your very wish, by your very acknowledgement of the blessings that He has blessed you with through someone else. That we somehow have the authority to open God's blessings upon others. It's a beautiful thought. And it doesn't come from a land or a people that only check mark, follow the law. Ruth is a story of people who love God the Father so much that they have a relationship with Him. The law is not a checklist of duties. It is the secret to wonderful and whole life. Good life, the best life, the most beautiful and wonderful life. And in acknowledging that and in obeying that and in living that out, they are given the authority to open the floodgates of God's blessings upon others when they acknowledge the goodness that has been done for them, towards them, by another. So Boaz protects Naomi and allows her to glean. I also think it's very interesting that he has her continue to glean. In our day and age, we just want to give somebody the end result. And we think that's the blessing, and it's not. There's value in work. There's value in dignity in working for what you're given, what you earn. And Ruth works hard, and she gleans much, and she takes it back to Naomi. And Naomi cries out, "The Lord, Yahweh bless him." Again, recognizing the goodness that Boaz has done to them and seeking God's blessing upon them for His great kindness. He has not stopped showing this kindness, this hesed, to the living and to the dead. That man is our close relative. He may be he is one of our kinsman redeemers. The Hebrew word there is goel, and we will look into that when the time comes. It means kinsman redeemer, one who assists family with food, with lawsuits, with the rights of a vulnerable family member. And it is in the shadow of God's ultimate goel. He is our model. He is our leader. He is the one who has redeemed us. And so he asks us to extend that and to redeem others with his kindness. So the hunger has been taken care of. The physical needs have been taken care of by the kindness of God. And that kindness of God has come into play through the lives of his people, which that idea is still in play today. That's who we are supposed to be, the kindness, the presence of God. However, the crisis has not been solved because there is no offspring to carry on the family name. So there is relief in the immediate, but not yet crisis resolution. So we get into chapter 3, and Naomi says, we've got to get the crisis worked on. And so she sends Ruth back to Boaz, hoping that he will be kinsman redeemer. And Ruth gives herself to Boaz. She offers herself to Boaz. It's interesting because in chapter 1, she adopted herself to Naomi. In chapter 3, she offers herself to Boaz. It's different, but it's the same. Boaz accepts his opportunity to be Goel with great kindness with Hesed, and thereby giving a chance for the family name to be carried on. Because when the Redeemer takes the wife of a fallen brother in Leviticus, the first child is named for the dead father. And so that family name can be carried on. But when she makes this offer to him, makes herself available to him, Boaz responds. I love this line. Oh, so on your paper, Act 3, Boaz accepts the opportunity to be Goel. That's G-O apostrophe E-L. It's actually two words come together. To be Goel with Chesed, with God's kindness. When she makes this offer, Boaz responds, this kindness is greater than the first kindness. He considers it a kindness that she is showing him to offer herself to him. When he has praised her for not going after the human thing and trying to fix it quick, and that she has honored her stepmother or her mother-in-law, and is feeding her and has come back home with her, and he saw that as a great kindness to her, and now he sees this as an even greater kindness, and steps up to the plate. He's willing to be Goel, and willing to be Goel fully and properly, as God does for us. He was willing to reach out. So then we get to chapter 4. Boaz secures Goel rights, so he is able to marry her and reclaim the family property. And it becomes evidence that the Lord's chesed, the Lord's kindness, is true. And this is made evident through his purposefully obedient children. It comes to pass through God using his purposefully obedient children. Boaz and Ruth have a son, name him Obed. The husband, Boaz, or I'm sorry, the husband of Ruth has a son through this program that God instituted. The mother-in-law has a son and changes her name back from bitter, away from bitter. And God's chesed is seen as true. It's a story of ordinary people, but it's a story about extraordinary people. This is not an ordinary story. It is a story of royalty. It is a story of God working his plan through his holy people to usher in the greatest earthly king of Israel, David. And when I say this is God working his plan through his holy people, I want you to understand that when I say the word holy there, what I'm meaning is obedient people to God's law, because they don't see God's law as a burden, as a checklist, but they see God's law as the secret to life, that which frees them from the bindings and the slavery of this life, from the lies of this world, and from the unnecessary burdens that this world and its expectations throws upon us at every turn. And it frees us to live the life that God designed us to live with great joy and great beauty and great passion and great value. These holy people are obedient to God's law joyfully because they trust God enough to lean into him. I have some very dear friends who passed out the papers to you. And then I believe also on Wednesday nights, she's in Oklahoma. Antoinette, yes, thank you. She's in Arkansas. It's not Texas, so anyway. No, I'm sorry. She's in Arkansas. And she uses that phrase, leaning into Jesus, leaning into God. And we were talking with Todd and Darla last night. That phrase came up several times, leaning into God. Do we trust God enough? Do we trust God's kindness, that central core characteristic of God, his chesed? Do we trust that God really is our kinsman redeemer? Do we really trust that God is completely involved in our life and working through our life when we trust him enough to be obedient? Do we lean into him enough that we can relax knowing that he's got us, that he's leading us, that he is blessing us, that he is redeeming us, that he is making us more and more holy and more useful in his hands? Do we really believe that? I believe that's what holy people do and what holy people thirst to become. The theme for Ruth is God is with us. He is in the midst of this life in its good moments and its most horrid moments. And he is working his kindness, his great kindness, and his good in every one of those moments. When Romans tells us that all things work together for good, it doesn't say all things work together for happy. It says God is in the midst of life, even in the pain, even in the horror, and he's working it for his good, which, if you trust him, is your best good. So we're called not to trust his earthly wisdom and standards, but to trust that God is involved and he is working, and that we can trust and depend and lean into his kindness. This was true for Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, and it's just as true for us today. The moral of the story, that bottom box there. God's chesed is real, H-E-S-E-D, sometimes spelled C-H-E-S-E-D, because it's that guttural sound in the Hebrew. God's chesed is real, and he is faithful to it. And through his kindness, he is faithful to the faithful. It's that repeating thing. God calls us to live the reality of that kindness to and with one another and to this world. And think about this. We are agents of God's chesed. That's how he chooses to do his business. Exercise the kindness of God in every situation and let God's goodness work. All right, so let's wrap it up. The point is, we're trying to learn to trust God enough to follow through, to believe that he that he is the way, that he is the truth, that he is the life. Jesus said that that's who he is in John 14:6, one of the great I am statements. Do we trust God enough to believe that his way is the best way? Remember in our study of Psalm 63, where in verse 3 it says, your love is better than life. That can very accurately be translated, your love, your chesed, that's that word, your kindness is the best of life. In fact, that little Hebrew word there that is meme or something like that, I forget exactly what it is. It's used, shows up about 100 times, 109 times in the Old Testament. 60 of them, it's translated of or for. Twice, it's translated the way we get it in our Bibles now, which is, your love is better than life. Than. Only twice out of 109. The overwhelming majority, it's of or for. Your love is the best of life. Your love, your kindness is the best for life. If we want to have the best life, learn God's kindness. That's what it's for the best life. Living God's kindness develops the best life, or it's the best of life. Leaning into God, accepting his kindness, dwelling in his kindness, and then living it out to the world is the best of life. There is nothing better than living God's kindness out, because we recognize how it has blessed and molded and shaped and freed us. Trusting God enough to follow through, trusting God enough to change, means that we have to know and understand his way, his character, his heart. His words is how we do that. The reason why studying Scripture is so important is that that's how God exposes what his heart is all about and who he is. It is a living illustration of his kindness. And the more we know it, the more we can lean into it and trust it, and the more we can live it out as well. That's what Ruth shows us. Ruth shows us what is a big deal to God. The sermon title. G-I-G-E. Gigi. Or Geig. I don't know, whatever. Or Gige in France, I guess. Great in God's eyes. There's nothing fantastic in the book of Ruth that we would point to as Americans and say, that's success. That's a great life. The book of Ruth is not about power or popularity. It's not about having all the money. It's not about any of those things that we tend to consider as important. Fame and fortune and everything that goes with it. But the book of Ruth is about what is great in God's eyes. And that is living God's chesed and leaning into it so richly, so fully, that we recognize the goodness of God coming to us in the actions and in the love of others. And we open the door and we seek God's favor and God's blessing be poured out upon them for their great kindnesses towards us. And we're also willing to be the ones who step out first and share God's kindness and open the door for his redemption to flood in. So this little book of Ruth, 4 short chapters, calls us to live out the kindness of God and to pay it forward. To follow through with our true identity, not as a human, but as a child of the Almighty everlasting, eternal King. To live out that identity with the core family value of chesed in every moment of life, the good moments and the crushing ones. And to live out the kindness of God right where you are, which is probably somewhere in between those two extremes. In your work, in your school, in your neighborhoods, in your local HEB, and even on Mopac. Oh. Moment by moment, may we remember and understand that life is not mundane. That life, even ordinary life, is the stuff of heaven. When we look for, when we rest in, when we lean into, and when we live out the kindness of God. And God is in the midst of it. And He is working His good, His hesed, His redemption in and through our obedient lives. Praise team, if you'll join me. Get out your song sheets. That last song is Psalm 23, a gift of kindness to us from Scott, putting this beautiful, incredible passage to music. I just want you to remember that in the last lines of that psalm where he says, "Surely goodness and mercy follow me." It's the goodness and the kindness, the chesed of God that is following, and that word for follow is pursue. Pursues us. God chases us with His goodness and with His kindness. And that's what we are called to do for others. So let's sing. Let's stand and sing this song of encouragement and think about how God, like a shepherd, nourishes us, takes care of us, and calls us and pursues us with His kindness to share that with the world so that they might know His beauty and the truth of the goodness that is His life. Let's sing.